Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Safety and Health webcast today. We're going to give our audience members about 2 minutes to join us, so please hold tight. We'll be starting the webcast in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's Safety and Health webcast. We're going to give our audience about 1 more minute to join us. Please hold tight. We'll be with you in about just 1 minute. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, Response versus Reaction, Conditioning the Human Mind to Deal with Risk, sponsored by DuPont Sustainable Solutions. My name is Barry Botino, and I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health magazine. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start the presentation, but first, I want to go over some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session with our speaker. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click the button for Submit Question. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin to ask your question. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible today, but because of the large number of attendees, we might not get to every question. However, any unanswered questions today will be forwarded along to our speaker. For basic troubleshooting information, click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. I'll let you know more about that later. This webcast will be archived. You can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, visit our website at safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's introduce today's speaker. Our speaker today is Padmakshi O'Neill. Padmakshi is a product manager for DuPont Sustainable Solutions, a company she joined in 2013. She manages the design, development, and delivery of sound and effective workplace learning solutions that combine the science of instruction with the art of design and production. Her extensive professional experience includes work in instructional design, organizational development, and change facilitation. Again, we thank you all for tuning in to this presentation today. And Padmakshi, when you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Over the past few years, I have worked and conducted research in the areas of human performance improvement, human factors, personal risk factors, and more importantly, how we human beings tend to make our decisions. And today, we're going to talk about how all that research applies to the area of risk. It all comes down to choice. Risk is all around us. We are aware of that. Some risks we avoid. Others we embrace. Not all of us might be comfortable getting onto this roller coaster that this woman seems to be enjoying. Not all of us are comfortable using power tools. I certainly am not. Others feel that they can be more productive working without their PPE. Have you heard that before? Or using their cell phones while driving. I cannot tell you how many people I see on the roads on my drive to work or drive home that are clutching to their cell phone with dear life and then using their free hand to maneuver their car. So it is about choices. It is about the expected consequences of those choices. And it is about our feelings and our emotions associated with those choices. Did you notice that I used the words feel comfortable, feel productive in the examples earlier? Free will is often associated with positive emotions. Rules and regulations tend to be accepted, sometimes grudgingly, but looked upon as forced choices, and often associated with negative feelings and emotions. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had to enforce rules about screen time with your kids? How did that go? My sister got into constant fights with her 11-year-old when it came to sticking to screen time. One day she decides that she's going to let him stay up as long as he wanted playing a video game on a school night. Now, you have to understand, my sister is a child psychologist. She decided she was going to do this experiment. Well, the next day, he comes home from school, plops his stuff down, and says, Mom, I've decided that I'm going to go to bed early and stick to my screen time. I could not stay awake at school today. And guess what? He stuck to his screen time after that. But things don't tend to work out this easily in the workplace, though, do they? We tell people about things they should do, things they shouldn't do. And I personally have experienced this. I decide to change the way I do a particular thing. And maybe I'm successful for a little bit, but then I find myself falling back into old patterns. Part of the problem lies in how we humans make decisions. We all like to think that we make every decision after carefully analyzing research, information, data. But the fact is that we rely heavily on our biases, on our past experiences dealing with similar situations, on numerous noise variables, and the associated feelings and emotions. Most of us are extremely busy. We tend to go through our days caught up in a nonstop tsunami of thoughts, feelings, activities, emotions. We can rarely do one thing at a time anymore. Most of us have become accustomed to and comfortable juggling various mental and physical activities. It's scary sometimes if you sit back and think about it. And our experiences, things that we have done, similar things that we have done in the past, the biases that have formed over a period of time, different variables that are involved in our decision making, all of these have the potential to impact how we feel about certain things and impact the decisions we make. Understanding this becomes especially critical when we are considering any kind of risk. Do any of you do something a certain way because years ago your dad or your granddad told you to do it in that particular way? Growing up in India, I often pushed back on my mom about things she would forbid me from doing, or where she would correct me when I was in the middle of doing something, some chore mostly, and tell me not to do it at a certain time. Don't cut your fingernails at night. Don't sweep the floors. It's evening. This is not the right time to do it. When asked why, she would say, well, that's what my mom told me. That's what she did, and that's what her mom before her told her too. Through the ages, the experiential system has supported human survival. Now, what does that mean? Long before we had probability theory, risk analysis, decision analysis, there was intuition, gut instinct, and even the sixth sense telling people what was safe, what was unsafe. Approach this animal, you might be able to kill it. Avoid drinking this water. Humans experienced the world around them and made their decisions based on their own experiences and those about which they had heard. In the example I shared with you, rural India had no electricity when my grandma was growing up. It got really dark in the evenings. If somebody cut their fingernails in the evening, they might not have been able to clear them all out and throw them away. If you swept the floors in the dark, you likely didn't see everything that was littering the floor. So it made sense for these rules to be in place at that time. In the cities, years later, not so much. As the world around us became more complex and people gained more control over their surrounding environment, the use of analytical tools to boost thinking became more and more predominant. So much so that over the years, analytical thinking has come to be synonymous with rationality, and experiential thinking has come to be synonymous with irrationality. The fact is that there are strong elements of rationality in both these systems. I'll give you another example. I was facilitating a personal risk awareness workshop recently, and one of the exercises we did as part of the workshop was to assess the level of risk in a particular activity. I showed this image on the screen, and I asked the participants to assess the risk level in smoking. Different groups got together, they discussed what they thought the risk level was, but there was this one group that was still heavily involved in a discussion. Two individuals in particular had two completely different perceptions of the risk involved in smoking. One person, let's call him Al, said that the activity was 100% risky. The other individual, let's call him Ricky, insisted that the activity was only about 30% risky. So I asked them to share why they had each scored the way they did. Al responded with tons of statistics on the harmful effects of smoking. Ricky agreed with those statistics, but said each individual is different and experiences different effects of smoking. After much back and forth, and by this time the entire class was involved in this discussion and trying to form groups, one supporting Al and the other supporting Ricky. Not something you want happening when you're on a tight timeline to complete a workshop, but that's a different story. Anyway, after much back and forth, Al finally said, my dad was a smoker. He died of lung cancer when he was about 50. I have personally experienced the horrors of smoking, and I will never see it as anything less than 100% risky. Ricky responded, "I'm sorry to hear that. My dad is also a smoker. He has smoked about a pack a day for 55 years. He is 75 and in relatively good health." Researchers recognize that the experiential and analytical modes of thinking are continually active. What does this mean? When faced with a certain task, the feelings and emotions that become dominant in the decision-making process depend on three things: the individual, the task, and the interaction between the two. Some tasks are perceived to be harder, others easier, and it depends on how we are able to evaluate the information related to those tasks. For example, if we've repeated a task over and over again, it might seem easier, it might feel positive, and therefore we perceive it as less risky. Let's reflect on a time when we had to learn a new skill, driving a car or handling a new piece of machinery, for example. When you were first introduced to the task, what did you do? Did you slow down and pay a lot more attention to what you were doing? I guess we are all consciously aware that we are doing something unfamiliar, and that causes us a little bit of a pause. Do you remember the first time that you sat in the driver's seat to drive? The fear, the anticipation, the exhilaration that you experienced. Well, as you progressed on your journey of learning how to drive, I'm sure you had to learn the different steps and sub-steps that were involved in driving. You likely knew that you had to get your driver's permit. You were told that you had to learn to drive in different environments and gain different experiences, and of course, make up your practice hours. What happened the first time you had to drive in rain or in the snow? I have a ton of horror stories about that. Again, not being from here, having to drive in the snow for the first time seemed like fun, but after I had done it the first time, not so much. So what happened when you had to do it for the first time? Did you adjust your speed because now you were driving on a different road condition? As time passed, you probably not only learned how to drive, but you became very good at it. You knew how to drive in different conditions, on different terrain, and you understood the hazards and potential pitfalls that were present when you were driving. Over time, you became so skilled that at times you no longer even had to think about what you were doing. For example, do you remember putting on the seatbelt this morning? Or have you become so habituated that as soon as you get into the car, you put it on, that you don't even think about it? While this level of skill can be beneficial in many ways, it also comes with a heavy price. Most of us can relate to that unnerving experience of arriving at our destination and not having any conscious recollection of the drive itself. We become adept at subconsciously making any necessary decision and any adjustment to complete the given task, in this case, driving. An essential part of risk assessment is to determine the severity of possible adverse consequences and the likelihood of the occurrence of each such consequence. People tend to rely on a limited number of experiential principles to simplify the complex tasks of assessing probabilities. If I stand on a swivel chair to change out this light bulb, the chances of me falling and hurting myself are more or higher than if I stand on a dining chair, something like that. On the job, employees often fall back on what they have experienced, what they know, or something that they may have not experienced to determine the likelihood of something bad happening. Have you ever expressed concern to someone over something they were doing, over their safety, only to have them say, "Oh, that's not going to happen to me. I've done this many, many times before, and nothing bad has ever happened"? Well, then you know what I'm talking about. Early psychometric studies of risk perception show that feelings of dread, feelings of fear, were the major determiner of public perception and the acceptance and rejection of risks. As people are able to conquer their feelings of dread, they start perceiving hazards and risks differently. Let's go back to the driving example for a minute. As we overcame our fear of driving, I'm talking about new drivers primarily. As we overcame our fear of driving, or in my case, of merging, especially on the interstate, our perception of the risks involved in driving changed. And they kept changing till we got to the point where we didn't even have to think about some of the major steps involved in driving. As that happened, we got more comfortable with driving and started looking at it as less risky than how we used to look at it before. I'm sure you've heard people say, "Oh, that risk was totally worth it." We humans often weigh the risks in our actions against the reward that we perceive we will receive by taking those risks. While we like to think that as rewards increase, the risk decreases, that is not the case. Rewards and risks have a direct correlation. When faced with risky situations, especially at work, we have the perception that our organization's safety practices will protect us from the hazards around us. I'm sure all of you have outstanding safety systems in place to protect your employees. That expectation, though, that these safety practices, these safety systems can protect us, that expectation cannot be fulfilled beyond a certain point. Safety systems cannot account for everything. They definitely cannot account for the decisions humans make in real time and under real circumstances. Earlier this year, I was talking to a client about a sudden increase in back injuries in one of their plants. Workers in that plant often had to lift heavy bags of raw materials and load them onto trucks. The organization had provided the workers with lifts to assist with this task. And there were plenty that were available for the people that were working on this particular task. The workers, though, had tried the lifts, but they had found it faster to lift the bags in their arms, walk across with the heavy bags, and fling them onto the trucks, thus leading to that spate of back injuries. Many of us are not consciously aware of the things that we do. And some behaviors get delegated to the automatic or semi-automatic way of operating. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Typically, we only make decisions consciously when those decisions are interpreted as involving significant consequences, either good or bad, life-changing decisions, so to say. In this case, these workers had weighed the risk and the reward. They decided that they would rather get the work done faster and made a decision to not use the lifts. Now let's be fair. Some of them may have wanted to keep using the lifts, but agreed to go along because they did not want to appear weak. Others may have done it because they observed somebody else do it that way and figured that was a better way to do that. There are multiple aspects to be considered, right? But our choice, whether it is a conscious choice or a subconscious choice, our choice to either accept or reject risk happens in one of two ways: risk reaction or risk response. Risk reaction is the fast, instinctive, and automatic decision to either accept or reject the risk. Risk response, on the other hand, is our reasoned, logical, and deliberate decision to accepting or rejecting the risk.
And that brings us to our first opportunity to connect with today's audience. We'll give everyone about a minute to choose one of our two possible answers to today's first poll question. As the poll appears on your screen, take a moment to answer the following. Which one do you use most? A, risk reaction, or B, risk response? We'll give you all about 10 more seconds to submit your answers for this poll. And we're getting some great responses so far, so thank you for all of your votes. And now let's go ahead and close out our poll and take a look at our results. And as you see there, risk reaction is the item that has won out today, 61% to 39% for risk response. Padmakshi, are you surprised at all by the results that we're seeing from our attendees today?
I am, but I have to say that the attendees are honest, and I like that. For those of us that are thinking that we look at safety, risk, decision-making in a different way, we might be able to say that, I try my best to respond to risk, and I'm sure that you are doing it. As for me, I've been working and researching in this area for a while now, and I still find myself reacting from time to time. The difference is that now I catch myself, whereas in the past, I was unaware of what I was doing. Having workers who know the intricacies of their job so well that they don't need to consciously labor over how do I do this, what are the next steps, what am I supposed to do if something unexpected happens. That sounds like the embodiment of what we want our workforces to achieve in terms of skills. But nothing can be further from the truth. What we need are workers who are able to leverage the experiential component to accurately analyze and respond to risk. It has long been believed that if individuals are motivated enough or provided enough incentive to be safe, then they will be safe, right? Motivation alone, though, is not sufficient to lead to lasting change. I might be motivated to exercise every morning, and that motivation lasts, say, about a week, and then something happens, and it's difficult for me to get back into that pattern of exercising. So motivation alone is not sufficient to lead to lasting change. It's the same with incentives. But we also have to remember that being safe doesn't necessarily mean being free of risk. So we have to make that essential shift in our thought processes. To improve safety performance, organizations must understand how employees make decisions and then teach them how to make better decisions to lower their risk. Kurt Lewin, considered to be the grandfather of applied behavioral science, suggests in his force field analysis model that human behavior or individual human behavior is a function of personal factors and the impact of the social environment. Thomas Gilbert's behavior engineering model is built on the principle that all instrumental human behavior has two aspects of equal importance: a person with a repertoire of behavior and the supporting environment. Both these models suggest that when training individuals, especially in the areas of safety and risk, we need to focus beyond just human behavior. Behavior, after all, is an outcome of our decisions, whether conscious or subconscious, and decisions can be influenced by different perspectives. Both these models explain why training-oriented change efforts that are aimed solely at individuals often have a higher failure rate. An organization's safety performance is the cumulative sum of the individual safety performance of all employees. So to improve an organization's safety performance, of course, what we have to do is improve the safety performance of each employee. To improve individual safety performance, we need our employees to learn a few different things. How to rapidly respond to risk, even when they are tempted to react. How to account for factors that impact decision making. So this is the bias, personal experience, past experience, noise, feelings, emotions, everything that we've talked about so far. So they have to learn to account for these factors. They, of course, have to understand the value for reducing risk. In the case of my nephew's example, till he saw the value in what my sister was telling him, he was not ready or willing to make that change. The moment he realized, if I don't get enough sleep at night because I'm playing this game, I'm going to have a hard day at school the next day. Understanding the value for reducing risk and leveraging the experiential, everything that we have learned from our past experiences, leveraging that to analyze the situation so we are able to respond to this. But then how do we do this without creating training efforts that are aimed at individuals? It comes down to conditioning the human mind. There is extensive research out there regarding how habits are formed. If you have not read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I recommend that you do so. Duhigg talks about how companies exploit habit cues and rewards to try to sway customers to buy a particular product. Think about applying the same approach here as we think about the habit of taking risks. Habits, scientists say, emerge because the brain is constantly looking for ways to save effort. Left to its own devices, the brain will try to make almost every routine into a habit. It's because habits allow our minds to ramp down more often. Now let's look at this in the context of the workplace. Employees are hired for a particular role and often repeat the same tasks over and over and over and over. Those tasks and the steps involved in completing those tasks pretty soon become habits. When that habit emerges, the brain stops fully participating in the decision-making process for that task. And the brain's attention gets diverted to focus on other tasks. Now add to that noise variables, preconceived notions, biases, and we start to see a pattern of risk reaction.
And that brings us to our second poll question of the day for our audience. Again, we'll all give you about 1 minute to choose one of our 4 possible answers you see on your screen. And as the poll appears, take a moment to choose the answer that best describes you. Our question today is, how do you and your partner make important decisions? For example, say you want to purchase something or go on a vacation. The answers to choose from are A, you conduct research, discuss, and make a decision together. B, you conduct research, make a decision, and tell your partner about it. C, you don't need to research because you're omniscient. Or D, you don't like making important decisions. We'll give you all about 10 more seconds or so to get your submissions in. And again, we're getting some excellent feedback here. This is a very responsive group today. And now let's go ahead and close out that poll and take a look at our results. And we have a runaway winner, 87.4%. You conduct research, discuss, and make a decision together. Very far behind is B, you conduct research, make a decision, and tell your partner about it. Padmakshi, what do these results tell you about our audience?
So the first thing is I am interested in those people that have marked C. Just get with me in private later because there are a few things that, I could have you look into for me. But yes, most of us, we conduct research, discuss, and make our decisions together. I don't know how it goes for those of you that just tell your partners you've made a decision and just, move on with it. I don't know how that works, but I'm sure that you have your reasons for doing that. So we've talked about a lot of different things, but I want to leave you with this 3-step mindfulness approach to consciously undertake and complete any task. An approach that will provide you with a critical framework to increase awareness and reduce your exposure to unnecessary risks. The first step is making a conscious shift in your mindset from thinking in terms of safe and unsafe to instead thinking in terms of risk. This sounds very simple, but we have been conditioned to think about things as safe and unsafe for so long that we forget that anything that's safe also has an element of risk associated with it. The second is making a personal commitment to risk response. What do they say about answering an email when you are angry or responding to a text message when you're angry? Talk to my husband and he'll tell you, because he often gets my responses, or rather my reactions. Write the response, delete it, calm down, and then write the actual response that you want to send. Something like that, right? Apply the same strategy here. Make a commitment that when you are tempted to react, you take a couple of deep breaths. Bring in different perspectives. Think about past experiences and what was similar and what was different in those experiences from what you're currently facing. Account for your feelings and your emotions. Analyze the situation and then make your decision. I'm not talking about sitting down and making a pros and a cons list. I understand that often in real time and under real circumstances, we have very little time to do this, right? This is a quick mental activity. And the more you do it, the more you get accustomed and habituated in doing this. And then the third thing is to get group input. We talked about how you and your partners make important decisions, right? A lot of you said that you conduct the research, you discuss, you get together, you talk about it, and then you make that decision. Amy Edmondson, Nevada's professor at the Harvard Business School, has done a lot of work in the area of psychological safety. In her TED Talk titled Building a Psychologically Safe Workplace, she talks about work groups that deal with uncertainty and require a high level of interdependence to perform. Her approach can best be summarized by the creation of small work team cultures that share a few norms. Approaching work tasks as learning problems, not execution problems. An acknowledgement of fallibility and a model of curiosity. Now, if you ask your employees to get into groups, discuss the tasks that they are about to do, look at the risks that are involved in those tasks, that is going to help bring about a shift in their mindset. For a habit to stay changed, two things need to happen. People need to believe that that change is possible. So it's not a forced choice, but a free choice to actually bring about that change. And most often, that belief only emerges with the help of a group. So believing that change is possible and getting input from a group becomes important. 2 seconds. Often that's all the time your brain has to be able to process information, process the risk that is involved in a certain task, and potentially act upon your decision. When you have time to deliberate on your decision, discuss your decision with others, you allow the risk-response mindset to set in and help you cognitively analyze and generate value from past experiences. And that is what we do here at DuPont Sustainable Solutions in every workshop that we design. We utilize learning strategies that help individuals get into the response mindset. We force people to get into conversations, and those conversations help challenge biases, bring to the surface feelings and emotions, help individuals account for noise variables, and help generate a personal value for safety. That's all I have for you today, folks. Any questions?
Great job, Padmakshi. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise with all of us today. I want to remind our audience members, if you'd like to ask a question of our speaker, simply type it in the text box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click the button for Submit Question. Before we start the Q&A, I also want to pass along a reminder to everyone of the evaluation survey that you'll be seeing pretty soon on your screen here. Your input is really important to us because it will help us to improve our future webcasts. If you don't see the evaluation survey on your screen, please turn off your pop-up blocker. You may also access the survey by clicking on the survey button near the lower right-hand part of your screen. Now let's get to some questions today. And Padmakshi, our first question here is, Steve asks, in your experience, how much exposure is needed to change a behavior that a person holds as part of their very identity? For example, repetitions, hours, however you choose.
That's a great question, Steve. Unfortunately, there is no single answer for each person, right? Because as we saw, it depends on the individual, the task, and the interaction between the two. So you have familiarity with the task that comes into play. You have knowledge and skill level that comes into play. Personally, for me, I have seen that if I start a habit while I'm on vacation, or if I start changing something that I do while I'm on vacation, while I'm away from the everyday noise of things around me, then it's likely to stick with me longer than when I try to do it while I am in the middle of my everyday confusion and chaos.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from our audience today. Someone asks, what do you mean by noise elements?
That's a great question. Noise, well, first of all, it is the noise around us, right? The physical noise that we all have going on around us in our day-to-day lives. But it also means the different variables that we have to consider as we make our decisions. So I'll give you a quick example. I was in Cincinnati last year. It was my first time visiting Cincinnati. I got to the airport, I picked up my rental car, and I was driving in the direction of my hotel. Now, I have driven before. I drive every day, and I have driven for a long period of time, right? Well, that day, I did not have navigation in the car. So I have to rely on using my cell phone to provide me with directions. I start driving. Every few seconds, I see myself glance down at the map to see where I'm going. Now, I can hear her giving me directions, but because I'm in an unfamiliar surrounding, I am even more conscious that I don't want to do anything different, anything wrong. Well, I'm going downhill, and it starts drizzling. So now I am on a wet, slippery road. So I'm doing a task that I'm familiar with, driving, but now I have to add the variables of driving on an unfamiliar road, driving on a wet road, driving not knowing exactly where I am going. All these variables are considered to be noise, and they impact the decisions that I make.
Great. And Ryan from our audience has a question. He says, we have a lot of remote employees that work in silos. How can they benefit from this approach?
That's a great question. And the answer is technology. A lot of us have access to cell phones, especially employees that work remotely or work in silos. They can always pick up the phone, text a couple of their work buddies and say, hey, I'm about to do this. What would you do in this situation? You can text your supervisor. There are apps available that you can, get together for your group and have a group chat or a group app where you ask that question and get that group input. But honestly, even the step of just pausing, pulling up your phone, typing that information in, gives you enough time to assess these different things, these different factors that are involved in making your decision.
Great. And our next question is from Paul. He asks, when there are no negative consequences to an action, how does one convince someone that that action can or will have a negative outcome at some point?
Great question. When there are no negative consequences, it is tough, isn't it, to tell someone that this could happen, bringing the fear of God onto them? Well, the answer lies in the probability and the likelihood. Every time they do that and they get away with no negative consequences, the probability of something bad happening keeps on increasing. So you can talk to them if they are extremely rational people. You can talk to them in terms of probability. Another approach that I have seen work is getting people talking about the why of safety. Why is safety important? Why are you doing what you are doing? A lot of times when you talk to these employees, why are you here? Why are you doing this job? Well, I have to feed my family. What happens if you get hurt? Who is going to feed your families? touch upon what is important to them, touch upon what matters the most to them, and spin this in that direction. What would you do? What would your family do? What would your friends do if you were not able to provide them because you were, I'm sorry, but because you were stupid and refused to do this the right way?
Great. And David has a comment and a question. First, he says, I would agree fully that group discussions are the best method towards risk assessment, mitigation, and implementing controls. And David asks, in your experience, who resists the most in your observations? Is it the worker or the supervisor who resists the most?
Great observation, David. I have worked with several different organizations, and I would say it's about a 50-50 split. A lot of times workers want to do things differently, but they feel the pressure from supervisors and from managers. And if that supervisor or that manager is one, not willing for those discussions to happen, and the reasons could be different. He's more production focused, or she wants things done a certain way. Those workers are not going to go against the manager and do those things. A lot of times, more seasoned employees, they can actually be very helpful because they can provide that perspective, that past experience perspective to newer employees about the pitfalls of doing something a certain way. But you might find employees unwilling to get into a group setting, unwilling to speak up in a group setting, maybe because it hasn't gone so well for them in the past. So unfortunately, it's a combination of both.
All right. Matt has a scenario and a question here for you. Matt says, in regards to how to be safe, the topic of incentives is always a sticky situation. OSHA frowns on incentivizing on the basis of being safe. So what forms of incentivizing do you recommend that have been successful but that don't break the rules?
I would say success stories really, really work. So we were visiting a client, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and they have these notice boards, in different parts of the building that we were in. And some of these had these really colorful posters. So we went up to these posters and we asked our connection there at the clients what they meant. And they had pictures of people from their organization but depicted as superheroes. And they said, oh, these are our superheroes. They did everything per the process and they saved lives. So we are rewarding them by basically telling the organization, giving them a chance to tell the organization what they did, why they did it, why it mattered to them to step up and do things differently. And we give them that opportunity to share their experience, to share their story in an effort to maybe get others to do the same thing. So any kind of, when I say rewards recognition program, I don't mean, again, a physical reward, but any kind of a recognition program for doing the job well. I have seen that work within organizations. Maybe a little bit of a competition between different groups. Hey, we are trying to get, even with production, we are trying to get this done, but we are going to have a competition of, XYZ, and no incidents, no near misses, making sure that we follow the steps and we do this safely. So something like that.
Okay. And George has a question for you, Padmakshi. He says, we're in the middle of a change in the mindset our facility has around safety, and we've seemed to have reached a plateau. What is a method or an idea that we can use to break through to that next level?
Great question, George. And we've talked to several organizations over the past few years that have experienced that. People get into that safety mindset and they go, and then suddenly it's like we are doing everything, but why isn't movement happening, right? This whole discussion today, it was all about perspectives, and it was all about changing perspectives, right? Sometimes we organizations get bogged down by, I want to get this done, and I want to get this done in this way, right? We start standardizing things. We start putting things into boxes. But maybe it's time for a little bit of a change in perspective. Maybe you just do a little bit of an informal survey with your people and talk about what they would do to do safety differently. One thing that I have seen work is bring in perspectives from the parents within the organization. If it were your child in this situation, would you allow them to do this particular thing in the same way as you are doing it? What would you do? How would you have that conversation? So having them think a little bit outside the box, think beyond just how safety applies to what they do at work, to how they view safety outside work, on their transit or at home. Having them bring in that different perspective, and then maybe as a group coming up with how about we apply some of those principles to what we are doing here at work might be a direction to go.
Great, thank you. Maureen has a question today, and she asks, how do you engage employees in group discussion about routine tasks?
That is a fabulous question, Maureen. It sounds tough, doesn't it? Well, somebody's done that same task for 30 years. Somebody is most likely new at that particular task. And so you could just basically start with, today we're just going to talk about working at heights. Maybe that's the task that they do on a routine basis. What is the first thing you do? Why do you do it that way? What is the second step? Why do you believe that is the second step? Well, the rule book says so. Okay, why do you think it says so in the rule book? Again, not everybody is very comfortable talking in a group setting. So maybe sharing some personal stories, some personal examples to get them going, to get them talking. One thing that we have seen work over and over these past 4 or 5 years is working in that affective space, talking to people about things that matter, talking to them at their heart level. Hey, why does this matter? Why is this of value to you? So getting them to share personal stories of why they do certain things a certain way. And even if one person shares, then it's easy for you to get the group going. Sometimes you, as the person initiating that conversation, need to be the one sharing that story, and then, getting the group to talk to you about your experience and what you have shared.
Great, and we have time for one more question today, and that will be from Janice from our audience. And Janice asks, what do you recommend to move employees from a mindset of risk reaction to a mindset of risk response?
Well, Janice, it's a combination of different things, right? As I was just saying, using that affective domain in your communication, in how you are communicating the important principles of why doing things a particular way, even in communicating the rules and the regulations that you have within your organization. But using that affective domain becomes important. The second is giving people the space and the time that they need to do things. Now, of course, if we are talking about violations of life-saving rules, absolutely not. That's a completely different story. But let's say you observed Tony working without his safety goggles over and over. You've seen that, every time you walk through that part of the floor. Maybe just having a conversation with him. Hey, Tony, do you not have the right size glasses? Why is it that you're not wearing your glasses? You might approach him thinking that he's just not following the rules. But it could be that it's hot and humid in the space and his glasses are fogging up and he's not able to do the task effectively, efficiently, and so he keeps removing those glasses. So maybe working to provide an alternative that either you change the air setting there, or you bring in a fan, or doing something that will help him, but it will also make him feel that he is heard, that he has the time and the space that he needs to go from that reaction, I'm just going to take the glasses off, to, hey, I'm going to go talk to my supervisor and see if there's an alternative that I can do here that will help me do this task much more safely and with less risk.
Great advice. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions today, but all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded along to our speaker. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey on your screen to share your feedback. And that ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I'd like to give a special thanks to our presenter, Padmakshi O'Neill, and everyone from our sponsor, DuPont Sustainable Solutions, and of course, all of you who listened in today. Have a safe day, everyone.